look, here comes his daughter Rachel with the flock now. Jacob said, look, it's still broad daylight, too early to round up the animals. Why don't you water the sheep and goats so they can get back out to the pasture? We can't water the animals until all the flocks have arrived, they replied. Then the shepherds moved the stone from the mouth of the well, and we water all the sheep and the goats.
Okay.
Now while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and woke the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Then it came to pass when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things. And Laban said, surely you are my bones and my flesh, and he stayed with him forever.
And Laban said unto Jacob, because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thou wager to? And Laban had two daughters, the name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well favored. And Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel thy younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better I give her to thee than that I should give her unto another man. Abide with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they sang unto him for a few days, for the love he had for her.
Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, my time, I want to sleep with her. So Laban invited all the men of the place to the feast. That evening Laban took his daughter Leah, gave her to Jacob, and slept with her. Laban gave his slave Zilpah to his daughter Leah as her slave. The morning came, there was Leah. So he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Wasn't it for Rachel that I worked for you? Why have you deceived me? Laban answered, it is not the custom in this place to give the younger daughter in marriage before the firstborn. Wait this week for the wedding celebration, and we will also give you this younger one in return for working yet another 7 years for me. Jacob did just that. He finished the week's celebration. Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as his wife. And Laban gave the slave Bilhah to his daughter Rachel for her slave. Jacob slept with Rachel also, and indeed, he loved Rachel more than Leah. He worked for Laban another 7 years.
Okay. All right. Thank you, my readers there. This is the Word of God, and this is the next drama in the story that is the life of Jacob and the overall story of Genesis. So let's take just 1 second to recap a moment. We have heard what has taken place here, but why is Jacob now in a strange land to him? Why is he now in the place called Haran? Can anybody remind me why he's here? He had deceived his father, and that caused what at home? Yeah, breaking apart, okay, tension, yeah, all sorts of things. And it's not like people were just mad. I mean, there was a huge explosion, right, at home per se. His brother Esau is willing to kill him. And that threat was taken seriously enough by his mother and by him that he left. And there was no bluffing here. We know Esau is a mighty man of hunting and game. And so he fled to Jacob, that is, fled to save his life from Esau. And so now he is here and he is in search of something. What was Jacob looking for? He's looking for a wife, exactly. So he comes to this place, and there is a well here. And we're kind of looking at that first section that we read, which is the verses 1 through 9. We'll camp out here for just a second. But why, there's a lot of space taken up here in this first section just talking about this well. Let's take a minute and just think through this. Why is there so much talk about the well? What's the significance of the well? What can we know about this? Just kind of dialogue with me about the well in this story. And don't overthink it. I mean, let's just kind of look at this together. All right, yeah. Ronnie, you want to say anything on that? Okay. Ronnie said Jonathan don't know nothing about that, so yeah. Okay, so it's like the learning center. All right. What else could we say about the well here? You know, in studying the Bible, one of the things you're taught to do is contextualize. So put it in the context of your day. And if that right there is not contextualization, I don't know what is. So, all right. Well, what else? What else can we say about the well? And maybe even kind of stemming from what Jonathan said. Let's talk about this some more. What else about the well here? Where else have we seen wells in the story of Genesis thus far? Do we remember other stories where wells have played a key part? Abraham. Okay. Yeah. Okay, back in chapter 25, right in there. Yep, there's divisions there. Anything else? All right, let's wind the clock back a little bit more to, it's around chapter 24, where Isaac has yet to meet his wife, who is, of course, Rebekah. He doesn't know that yet. Abraham sends his servant to go find him a wife from Abraham's hometown, okay? And he goes to a well, much like the learning center. And this is the social hub. So think about this. If water is the source of life, it's the source of life for us. Or I should say it's something that sustains our life, of course. We need water. And it's something for plants, animals. It's going to be a central place that everyone goes. And so Abraham's servant comes to a well, knowing that he's going to find people from the town. And in this way, Jacob finds a well, knowing that he's going to be able to find information here. And so who does he see? Jacob. Who does he see at this well? Who else is present here at the well as we look at the first couple verses? Okay, there's shepherds. Any other detail we see here about people at the well? Okay, if there are shepherds, then there has to be flocks. All right, so they're keeping their flocks. And there's a detail mentioned here that the flocks are at this well at an unusual time. It says, well, it was still early in the day. Now, I'm not going to try to split hairs over this. These definitely aren't main details, but let's try to look at some of the details here. This helps tell the story for us. So he's come to a well, that's significant. And he's gone to this well probably for his own thirst, and who knows what kind of animals may be with him. We don't know that at all, but we can assume that he's not on foot. And he's come here and he's meeting other people. That was probably strategic. But he meets several other shepherds and several other flocks. Now, how old are these individuals or these shepherds? How old are the guys? We don't know. Okay? And again, this isn't a major point here, but we can assume that these are males, because it was customary in that time that a young boy would keep flocks. And it says shepherds, and later it calls Rachel a shepherdess, and that's important because that was uncommon for ladies to be keeping flocks and sheep at that time, which I'm not going to go off on a tangent here, but this probably points to Laban's wealth, that he's so wealthy he doesn't have enough sons, enough manpower to keep all of his flocks. Or it could mean that he has really no regard for his family and not a man of high character. He's even got his daughter out there working the flocks. But these boys, these shepherd boys, are probably young because they are not strong enough to move this stone off of the mouth of the well. We see that Jacob moves the stone away for them to gather water. Well, they're probably not strong enough if they're young boys to move that. They'd have to have a group of them to all come together to move the stone. But Jacob was able to accomplish that by himself. The other thing that we see here is Jacob is confused why all these flocks and sheep are here so early in the day. They should be out in the fields. They should be out grazing. They should be. He's dumbfounded why they're not taking better care of their flocks. You guys with me on this? Because here's the detail that matters. When we know these things, we have shepherds that aren't taking the best care of their sheep. It's contrasted to the high character of Rachel, who is a young lady who should not be having to keep flocks, but she is keeping her flock back until the end. So while they're being lazy, they've come up early in the day, they're about to water their flocks and put them away, Rachel is still out in the field. Rachel is still working, so we see a contrast there. Now, like I said, this is not a main point at all, but these are some investigative clues that we can make as we're reading Scripture and looking through it there. So he's getting the information that he needs because while he's talking to these boys, here comes Rachel. Now, what does Jacob do to the boys? What does this conversation end in here as we're looking through these first several verses here? Actually, we're not going to find that in verse 9, so I'll just make this point because we're going to kind of come to this in a second. But Jacob is eager to send these boys away because he probably wants to be alone with Rachel as she's coming up. So we can see that in our minds, he's telling these boys, water your flocks and get out of here, and he sees the beautiful Rachel, the shepherdess, coming up from the distance. Now, looking at verse 10, look at it with me. It says, "And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother." Now, I just want to know here, I wonder how much of this he was eager to get the shepherd boys to leave, or how much he was just trying to show off to Rachel as well as he's lifting this off. And verse 11 says, "And then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father." There's a lot going on right there. I would not use any of this for advice on how to talk to a potential spouse, how to date. I wouldn't take any advice from this at all. But there's a lot to unpack here. Why is Jacob filled with so much joy in just these couple verses right here? Well, what's the source of his joy? Okay. Looking for somebody. There she is. Okay. I guess Jacob was a proponent of kissing on the first date. I don't know. Not to make light of this, but we do need to understand that a kiss here is a different context than our own. The Bible says, greet the brethren with a kiss. We don't do that today. That's a good way to get knocked out. This would have been a greeting that was appropriate, male or female, but not for someone you just met. So even though this is a different context, even he has kind of overstepped here. He's so filled with joy because he's been on a journey that has taken him, we're not sure how many days, depending on how quickly he was able to travel, to this region. He has come to this well, and by providence of God, as soon as he's talking to these young men, here comes who will be, he doesn't realize this at this time just yet, but who will be his wife. And so we see the providence and hand of God all over this in a similar way to how we saw that in Genesis 24 when Abraham's servant comes, and almost the same exact thing takes place here. And so God is working and moving around wells, and I know that there have been books written about just all the stories that have taken place in the Bible from wells. And so this is another one of those instances right here. And so he's so overcome with joy. I'm sure she is taken back by all this. That is until they realize, hey, I know that you're the daughter of Laban, but guess what? I'm the son of Isaac, the son of Abraham. And so there's this joy and there's this exchange here. Now they know who each other is. And she runs back to tell her father, Laban. That's what she does here in verse 13. So look at verse 13. It says, and when it came to pass, when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, surely you are bone of my flesh. You are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for 1 month. Now, I might have skipped this earlier, but do we remember Laban? Remember the last time we saw Laban and the role that he played in the text? We did discuss him last week, I know. Just as clarification, Laban's sister is who? Rebecca, okay? So then when was the last time we saw Laban? What's that now? Yes, so Rebecca sent, Jacob to Laban to find Laban, and then there's a story before that where we saw Laban. He plays a key part when Rebekah is sent with Isaac's servant. That's the first time we see Laban. We believe at that time that Laban and Rebekah's father may have not been well because he stayed in the house and Laban took care of this process of Rebekah being sent off to be married. And so we saw Laban handling the family affairs. We saw then that they were already a wealthy family, and we continue to see evidence here that Laban is still doing well for himself. He's a wealthy man with flocks and herds and all of these things. So we see evidence of that. And it says that Jacob, when they have this conversation, that he stayed with Laban for 1 month. Now, I want you to think about this. In that month that they're talking and they're conversing, we don't know that Laban and Rebekah had any conversation for all of those years. A long period of time has taken place, decades even, and he's never seen his sister's offspring. This is the first time that he's ever met Jacob, never met Esau. to our knowledge. And there may have been some transition through, like we would call the mail today, but maybe through caravans they had talked, but it's unlikely that they'd ever seen each other since then or talked since then. And so there's a great, probably, emotion here and many stories that were told and things back and forth. And Jacob immediately, as a man that knows how to keep flocks, as a man that we've already seen as a hard worker in his home, he immediately makes himself useful in taking care of Laban's property and taking care of Laban's home. And that's when Laban asked him, hey, what can I pay you? What can your wages be? And so Laban sets those wages out. And what did Laban say he could do in his home? What did he say his wages should be? Starting in verse 15 is when we see that. So I don't want you to work for free. Name your price. And this is what Jacob says he'll do. Okay. He was willing to work for his wife for 7 years. So here we already see the craftiness of Laban. Now, Laban says, I'm wealthy, but Abraham, Isaac, they're even much more wealthy. And I'm sure he's aware of the promise and the covenant. And so here he thinks, there's no way I can lose in any regard by allowing Jacob in my home, and I have 2 unmarried daughters, and so there's going to be some kind of benefit for here in some kind of way. And so Jacob names his price, says, I'll work for 7 years for Rachel. Now Rachel is the youngest of the 2 daughters, and Laban agrees to this, and this is what takes place. Now, let's focus here on from verse 15 to the end of this text on the meat here of what really takes place. I think most of us are probably familiar with this story, and we've heard this before. Somebody give me a summary of what takes place here. So we know that Jacob says, I'm going to work for 7 years for Rachel. What transpires from that point on? In your own words, what takes place here? Did it work out the way Jacob thought it was going to work out? Yeah, he got shafted. Okay. Yeah. In what way? What transpired? Okay. Worked 7 more years. Are you going to say something else? He took Leah to him instead of Rachel. Okay. Now let's start thinking about this. How was he able to pull this off? Because let's be honest. People say that everyone has a twin, but everyone's unique, right? So how was Laban able to pull off this deception? There's a couple things at play here. Wedding ceremonies in this day was different, of course, than they are today. Weddings, marriage, everything was completely different than it is today. It was a contractual agreement. No one's going to anybody's dad these days and saying, I'll give you this amount of money, or, I'll trade you 1,000 goats for your daughter. That stuff's not happening anymore. And so all this is different, but this was lined up. And when the time came after these 7 years that he loved Rachel so much, they seemed like a day to him. They seemed like no time to him. She's brought to him, but in this day, a bride would be veiled. So you would not be able to see her. And evidently, she was close enough to Rachel's size and shape and the tone of her voice and all these things that he could not tell the difference between she and Rachel. And the story goes, of course, that during the wedding ceremony, none of this was known. We can presume that that night when they come home, it is dark and it is unknown to him that this is Leah until he wakes up the next morning. We're going to unpack this in just a second, but I often wonder what that few moments was like there when they wake up the next morning. But the point is, he was able to get away with this. Laban was able to get away with this because she was veiled. In our day, this wouldn't have happened, but due to the custom of that day, this is what took place. So Jacob would not have seen her face till the next day. Now, what led Laban to do this? What was Laban's reasoning in giving him Leah instead of Rachel?
We get 7 more years of work out of him? Or I know we said the age of that, really, if he just thinking you get 7 more years of work.
Okay, so 7 more years of work is definitely a way to look at this if we're understanding Laban's character to be what we believe it is at this point. Deception. Also, the custom of the day, plays in effect here. We're not even sure if that was the custom of the day. We don't know that. Apparently, Jacob wasn't aware of that. What were you going to say, Dustin? Okay, yeah. Yeah. That's one way to look at it. Okay. Yeah, I think these are all good ways to look at it. Now, let's take a moment to look at another secondary issue here in the text as well. Are we to understand that Rachel is really just so strikingly beautiful while Leah is just absolutely hideous? Are we to understand the text to say that? What's our thoughts on that? How have you in the past viewed, if you know this story well, how have you viewed Leah in regards or in relation to Rachel?
Sounds like she was like a plain Jane and Rachel was just beautiful.
Okay. So Leah's a plain Jane, Rachel's beautiful. Weak eyes, yeah. Very nice way to say that, yeah. Any other thoughts? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Evidently ain't worked out for her thus far. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty touchy here. We're glad Leah's not here with us today. Now, we don't know their age difference. For whatever reason, neither one of them had married. And my Bible says that her eyes were delicate. So let's look at that. Now, there's been a lot of debate here, and we can't be dogmatic or black and white on exactly what this means. But if you look at that word in the original translation and we try to put that in the context as best we can, it really means lesser. So again, scholars debate this. We don't have to split hairs over this, but think about this. I don't know that we're to understand that Leah was necessarily hideous. She was an ugly woman. But I think, or we know, that Jacob just has the hots for Rachel. And so evidently they had the same frame and close to the same figure. Maybe Leah was wearing some of Sarah's clothes and trying to walk like Sarah, on the wedding day and talk like Sarah. But still, they're close enough that there's no big red flags here. And it could be, in that sense of her eyes being lesser, that she just doesn't quite have the sparkle that her sister does. She just doesn't quite have the depth of beauty that her sister does. But I don't know that we're to understand she's absolutely hideous. I don't know that that's the best way to look at this. But again, we can't know. But it is interesting in this deception here how they're able to, or Leah is able to pass this off. So we know what's taking place here. Laban has deceived, but Laban's not the only one that has played a part in this deception here. We have Laban, we have Leah, we have Rachel, and then we have Jacob in the aftermath of all this. So I want us to look at this from everyone's perspective. Let's first start with Jacob. After Jacob knows that he's been deceived, what do we think his reaction and thought process was like? Put yourselves in Jacob's shoes. Let's talk about this for a second. How would you feel? How would you respond to this?
Probably worried about what Rachel was going to say. Angry and worried about it.
Okay. So he would have been angry, frustrated at this, and worried about what Rachel would think about this. You think the light bulb went off for him pretty quick? Do you think he was like, oh man, this is exactly what I just did? Or I don't know. How else do you think Jacob felt? Definitely, yeah. A little lamp oil would have went a long way, yeah. What about Leah? Let's think about her. How does she fit in this? Because I think there's two main ways we could look at Leah's response to this. Okay, she went along with it. I mean, guys, I'm just telling you, there's all kind of shows we can watch on TV and stuff, but read your Bible like you would read a drama. When we're in narrative, I give you this advice. In my personal time, I try to read the Bible out loud. It kind of helps me pay attention more. But when you're reading narrative, kind of read the parts like you would in a play, and it just brings it out. This is some super interesting stuff here. So, okay, so we're saying that, okay, she played along with it. What else if you're Leah? How are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you doing here? Okay. Okay. All right. 7 years of potential bitterness and jealousy building up here, yeah? Any other thoughts on Leah? Let's say that Leah didn't go along with this willingly. Different time period. And let's say that there was some just straight manipulation by her father. Let's let her kind of play the victim here. If that truly did take place, if she's kind of a victim in all of this collateral damage, how do you think she would feel if she wasn't as willing as maybe we think she was? Yeah. Huge. And as we find out later, they're going to be living in the same house, which is a big deal. Big deal. Yeah, already we see evidences that Laban may not have cared for his daughter the way that most fathers would, and that he's got one of them out being a shepherdess. And maybe there was manipulation and willingness all working together, that Laban says, listen, you're of whatever age she is, we don't know her age, and you still haven't been married, and this is your best option, and you just need to go ahead and do this. And that may have been what happened here. And so she could have some very, very, as we'd say in our modern world, self-esteem issues. She knows that she's not as beautiful as her sister, and there's some bitterness and jealousy. And you see how terrible this is? And then she's done this thing where she knows she's deceived Jacob, who maybe she did think was attractive, and maybe she desired a husband so much, as some of us have said here, that she was willing to do this, but only after her arm being twisted a little bit. So we see Jacob and we see Leah. What about Rachel? Where in the world is Rachel that she allows this to happen? All she would have had to say is, famously in the weddings, I object. That's all she would have had to do. So where was she at, and how do you think she feels about all this? Okay. She wasn't sitting on the second row. Yeah.
Don't you think she would have had some kind of hard feelings against Jacob for going ahead and doing
We don't know.
Well, I wouldn't have had him on a gold father.
Well, if Vicky was in this story, it would have turned out differently. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts here? I mean, what's the deal with Rachel? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because honestly, it appears to be that they could let the cat out of the bag after the ceremony, the legal binding part of this took place. So who cares for them? I didn't mention this earlier, but he says, fulfill her week. So a wedding ceremony in this day would have been a week-long celebration. And so, hey, you can come and you can know the other 6 days that, I've deceived you, but we just need Rachel gone for a few hours for this to take place. Yeah. So maybe that's a possibility too. Let this drama play out in your head. Leah is nervous. She feels terrible. She's got resentment and jealousy maybe for her sister. She's got resentment and jealousy for her father probably, who has kind of twisted her arm and put her here. She's probably already got resentment for maybe how her father treats her and that she's not already married anyway. And there's all this together, and she's like, I can't believe I'm doing this, and this is the way that I'm going to marry a man. But on the other hand, here is Jacob. He's probably a good-looking man. He is a extremely eligible bachelor. And then somewhere, maybe in a field way off down there, there's Rachel in some hut, locked away trying to get out while this ceremony is going on. And then there's servants who some of them know what's going on. The gossip got around, and they're snickering as Jacob brings his new bride home. And who knows, Jacob may have had a little liquid encouragement that night, and it might not just be lamp oil. He might have just been a little out of his mind too. And so not only does he wake up groggy in that sense, but he wakes up with the wrong woman. This is a drama. You got to read your Bible like this to get this picture in your head. So we've looked at these three characters. What about Laban? How does Laban feel about all this? Ain't that pretty good? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he's got Jacob cornered now. And earlier he said, name your price, 7 years. Well, Jacob, name your price again. Sounds like another 7 years and you'll get her. Well, now, Father Time catches up to all of us. He's got 14 years on him. And of course he gets Rachel before he has to work the next 7 years. But in order to legally have her, he's got to work those 7 years. So by the time all this is over, he's 14 years older than he was the day that they met at the well. And so this is the deception. And man, this is just all kind of twists and turns and everything going through here. Here's one of the ways I want to end up, though. I want us to take a moment and think back in chapter 27 with that famous story of Jacob deceiving his father and getting the birthright. You can look back if you wish, that's fine, maybe just from memory. Let's do this. Let's compare and contrast the deception of Jacob to his father in chapter 27 to this deception of Laban and Leah and all the other parties against Jacob. How are they similar? How are the two deceptions, these two stories, how are they similar? Okay, so we see a similarity between Rebecca and Laban. They've kind of got that same deceptive idea. How about the fact that both of them were led by a parent? Both of these deceptions were led by a parent. Both of them had the involvement of a child. Both of them had time to fester. So there was a 7-year period where there was maybe some jealousy going on between some sisters. And there was another 7-year period that's yet in the future where all this takes place. Let's give Laban the benefit of the doubt for just a second. He might have thought, even though he was going to marry off the oldest daughter first, he might have thought, well, in 7 years I can find her a husband. And he might have been a procrastinator like myself, and 7 years rolls around and he says, oh my goodness, I still don't have a husband, so this is what we're going to do. I don't have a husband for Leah, so this is what we're going to do. And so that could have been the case, but they both involved some type of participation here on the parent's side. How else do they compare? They both had lasting effects. This set the direction of a family for years and years. So this is something that didn't just go away in time. They both caused divisions. There's a split, there's tension, there's separation here. We've got two sisters who are already jealous, living in the same house, married to the same man. The book of Proverbs says, better is it to dwell on the corner of a roof than in a house with a contentious woman. It does not say with multiple contentious women. I'm not saying anything sexist when I say that, but God did not design a man to live in a house with two women, okay? And so this is a problem he's got here. They got lasting effects. And I say that in the sense of it's not God's design for us to pursue polygamy. God's design is for there to be harmony among a man and a woman until death do them part. It's a beautiful thing. But when we step out of that, it is a problem. And here Jacob has a problem on his hand. Not only that, we're going to see later, and we're not covered tonight, but the maids get involved with this too. This is messed up. How about this? In both of these stories, they thought that the end result justified the means they chose to get there. So in Jacob's story, when he deceives his father, he thinks, well, I need to be the one to gain this inheritance. I've got to be that guy. And so he deceived his father in a way to get to this end result, to be the one that will inherit the covenant promise that God had already given him, by the way. Here, Laban and Leah, whoever's involved all together, they think, well, and I know this isn't right to deceive Jacob, but we've got to get you married off, or I've got to find a husband. They thought that the end result justified the means that they used to get it. And this is just kind of one I found funny that I wrote down too, is they both dealt with bad eyesight. Isaac couldn't see Jacob, and Jacob could not see who he was marrying. And so there's that level of deception there too. Now here's a couple applications as we kind of come out of here. How does this help us? What do we learn from this? I think the biggest application that we take from this text as we go about our week this week, we can break every single law that God has ever given us. We can break all the 10 commandments. We can do all the wrong that we desire to do, but you will never break the law of sowing and reaping. What a man sows, he will always reap. And that was seen clearly in Jacob's life. He sowed to deception and he reaped deception. And in every case of your life, people today try to call it karma, and that's just a chief offshoot of what sowing and reaping is. But what a man sows, that he will reap. And Jacob saw that in his life. I think that's our main takeaway here. I think a similar application that we saw in chapter 27 is, although Jacob and his mother, Rebekah, sinned by deceiving Isaac, it still carried out the plan of God. Now, God's will and God's plan was going to be carried out no matter what. And God did not foreordain them to sin in this way. God's not the author of sin, but even with crooked, sinful man, God completed his plan and his will. And Laban here, unknowingly, in a sinful way, still carried out God's ultimate plan, that Jacob would marry Rachel, and that Jacob, in this sense, would marry Leah. And even in this sinful union of polygamy, and how all the other maids will come to this too, God still used that. Through Jacob comes the 12 tribes of Israel, and through Israel comes the Messiah. Now, who was the mother that produced all those generations back Jesus Christ? It was Leah. The one that was unloved, the one that was lesser. Through Leah comes the tribe of Judah, and from the tribe of Judah comes David, and from David comes eventually Jesus Christ. So God seems to always focus on the lesser. God always seems to draw out the one that is the outcast, the run of the litter, the one that's not as pretty. And he used her to produce, in many generations forward, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And so it's not that God condoned this union, it's not that God condoned this sin, but God can draw a straight line with a crooked stick. And God uses even sinful man to perform his purposes. And in that, I think we should be encouraged. And so we continue to walk through Genesis. One of these years, we will finish our study in Genesis. But that concludes chapter 29 all the way to verse 30. And we're going to look at this war of childbearing starting in verse 31 when we come back together the next time. Does anybody have any comment you want to add on that, or something else maybe you see in this text that you find interesting? All right. Well, Vicki, you mind closing us in prayer?